was to occur time and time again. And yes, it occurred a few weeks ago when our present president was about to drop some bombs on Iran after Iran shot down one of our big drones. And at the last minute, he called it off. This has occurred time and time again. Now, to this day, if you visit Miami and you meet a Cuban, he will tell you he hates President Kennedy. The hatred has gone from parents to children. I mean, most of the people who were alive then are now really, really old and deceased, most of the Cubans. But they hate President Kennedy because he promised support. But anyway, the Bay of Pigs was a fiasco, and it's a black mark on Kennedy's name and the Kennedy's administration. And it's one of the things that kept Kennedy from being in the top list of presidents. Anyway, the next crisis, though, was the Cuban Missile Crisis. We had some U-2 spy planes. Now, if you know about the U-2, it had a very, very wide wingspan. It was capable of flying higher than about any plane at that time. But we've had some U-2 planes flying over Cuba, and they photographed missiles in Cuba. Well, of course, the pilots reported it, showed the pictures to their superiors to the Pentagon. The Pentagon reported it to President Kennedy. President Kennedy, now make a long story short, ordered a blockade around Cuba. And he said those missiles must go, and we're not going to allow any ships into Cuba unless we inspect. Only one ship was ever stopped. It was a Soviet ship, was stopped and inspected. It was allowed to go through. Now, the Cuban Missile Crisis goes down in history as being the closest the United States and Soviet Union ever came to a nuclear holocaust. It did not revert to a nuclear holocaust. Why? Because the United States, under Kennedy, decided to negotiate one more time. Now, I want to say this. All the bad deeds President Kennedy done were somewhat atoned for here. He saved the world from a nuclear holocaust. He decided to negotiate. So he and his brother met with some Soviet ambassadors, and it is believed that they agreed, well, what we'll do, we'll pull our missiles out of Turkey if you will pull your missiles out of Cuba. So the United States pulled its missiles out of Turkey. The Soviets pulled their missiles out of Cuba, and the conflict was averted. Now today, of course, we have satellites that can spot individuals when walking on the ground. Yes, I have seen a picture of my house from satellite. My cars are not there. I don't know when the picture was made, and maybe they just don't put cars. But I know these pictures are good enough that they can spot me walking in my own yard. Any of you know what I'm talking about? I mean, these satellite pictures will show the place where you live. And like we knew where Osama bin Laden was, we told the world we didn't, but we knew where he was because we could see him. Every time he came outside his house he was staying in, then we'd see him go back in. We knew he was there. But when kids were playing ball, if a ball got into that yard, they'd simply give the kids another ball and say, hey, you know, but you're not allowed in here to catch your ball. But anyway, today, again, we could supposedly spot anything that the Cubans had there in their country. Cuba is still a communist country. Fidel Castro has passed on, but his brother Raul Castro rules it. And Cuba is, President Obama tried to act like Cuba was our friend. Some of our ambassadors began suffering brain damage from microwave radiation, which the Cubans insisted they had no part of. So anyway, Cuba has proven not to be a good friend. But anyway, the Cuban Missile Crisis ended somewhat in a victory for the United States and made Kennedy look better after the Bay of Pigs, look better in the eyes of the world than he had before. In the meantime, Kennedy and Khrushchev set up a hotline, a telephone line, to where if anything happened like this again, Khrushchev could get on the phone and phone Kennedy, or Kennedy could get on the phone and phone Khrushchev. They set up a hotline between the Kremlin and the White House. I don't know if this hotline is still around or not. We don't use telephone lines much anymore. If Kennedy, if our president wanted to get in touch with the Soviet president, I don't know how he'd do it, but probably have an easy time of it. Telephone lines are almost a thing of the past. I mean, most of you are carrying phones somewhat like this. Maybe better than this one, most of you, perhaps. This is our telephone anymore. Where's the line? It's a microwave line that joins us to a microwave station nearby, of which there are thousands.
A lot of people got rid of, or getting rid of, or gotten rid of their landlines.
I did. I
Yeah.
phoned AT&T back in 2020. See, I always wanted, my wife said, I got her going to Florida. And I got on the phone and called AT&T and told them that I was expecting a girl on the other end would argue with me. Instead, she, okay, give me your name and number. And I felt like I had an obligation to say something. I said, I have no quarrel with AT&T. It's just we have 5 cell phones in our family. 5. We don't need the landline anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but she had heard that before, so she acted like she wasn't the least bit surprised, wasn't the least bit concerned. Everybody was doing it. It was nothing. And she didn't ask, oh, what? You mean you can't pay? No, nothing like that. She just, in a few days they were disconnected. And we've done without it. We told our relatives in Ohio what to call, and she told their relatives who to call. And we haven't needed it.
Mm-hmm.
Just simply, no, people are getting rid of their landlines right and left.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Eventually, atmospheric tests were banned. Now, I want to say about the atmospheric test. Our family, I mean, you might not do this much in the South, but when it snows, we'll get out and collect some of the cleanest snow on the top and put it in a bowl and mix it with vanilla and maybe some canned milk and make snow cream. For many years, my dad would not do this because he said the snow was radioactive. Finally, late in his life, he started making snow cream again. And we had snow here in unexpected, unpredicted snow in December 2017. And my family made snow cream. You can buy it in a store, they say, but it doesn't taste like the real stuff. I mean, the supermarket snow cream. But just, again, it's just basically snow, vanilla, and canned milk, and stir it up. And eventually you experiment, get the right mix. And, But for many years, my dad went up because the United States and Soviet were conducting atmospheric tests of nuclear weapons. And we felt like we couldn't stop them. Unless they stopped and they wouldn't stop, they finally blasted a 50-ton TNT bomb, whatever that means. But it was a big blast. And supposedly the radioactive fallout would have come, see, across the ocean and hit the United States, because these fallouts go from west to east. So the fallout, the bomb was blown up, by the way, inside Siberia. And we thought that the fallout might hit us in the United States. We don't know if it ever did or not. We don't know as much about nuclear waste as we once did. But anyway, we did our nuclear testing in the Pacific, South Pacific, and the South Pacific Islanders were very upset at us. But eventually we stopped our nuclear testing up above ground. Now we still test our nuclear weapons below ground, and they do too. Now, I told myself I was going to mention this, so it's time. Here goes. All right, the nuclear weaponry involves subatomic particles. We are studying subatomic particles extensively at CERN, underground between Switzerland and France, where we collide subatomic particles. Have any of you ever heard that the subatomic particles will behave one way when they're being observed and behave quite differently when they're not being observed? Any of you heard any of that? You have? Okay, at least I don't know. It's hard to believe, but folk, this is what I've been told and stuff. I've always had at least one person in class who's heard it. Subatomic particles appear to be alive and know when they're being observed and when they're not. Far-fetched, fantastic, believe what you will, research it yourself. But anyway, we learned a lot about nuclear reaction, and we can use our nuclear knowledge not just to make bombs, but to make power plants. And a lot of the power plants in this country are nuclear. And by the way, the Soviets also built a nuclear power plant, and one of them in Chernobyl blew up, and it said Chernobyl won't be inhabitable for 600 to 900 years. The latest account I had, wildlife has moved in, and human life might be following in short order. These things don't stay radioactive as long as they said. As for the cities of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, some people were deformed in them for a while, but today people still live in them. They're inhabited. Radioactivity is down pretty much. Not at all as high as it once was. All right. Soviet Union and China. All right. When Stalin died, the Chinese said Mao Zedong should lead the fight for communism. Mao Zedong should be the leader of the communist world. The Russians said no, only the Russians were communists first, only a Russian should be the leader. And they split. They split between the Soviet Union and China, kept the communists at bay for a while, and a lot of us wondered if someday we would not go to war as allies with Russia again, fighting the communist China. That war has never occurred, but the split was a real split. The two sides did not get along. China wanted the Soviet Union to help them get the United States out of Taiwan. The Soviet Union would not. China wanted the Soviet Union to help Vietnam fight the United States. The Soviet Union would not. I want to quote Khrushchev. Khrushchev said, "Blessed is the man who talketh war when he knoweth not what he's talking about." Khrushchev also said, when the war is over, it won't matter whether you're Christian, whether you're communist, whether you're Muslim, whether you're Buddhist, all that will matter is who's left. He was afraid of nuclear war, and rightfully so. And I'll say, you may have noticed Khrushchev partially quoted the Bible. For a man who did not believe in God, Khrushchev used the name of God a lot. When they exploded the 50-ton bomb, he said, "I hope to God that we will never have to use this in a real war." Well, why would he invoke God's name? And he said, if there's another war, God help us. Why would he invoke God's name when he claimed not to believe in it? But he was often talking about God. Anyway, China was alienated and China began to isolate itself. Now, into this isolation of China, for many years it was really difficult to get into China. And I'll say that both my wife and my two daughters, all three of the women in our family have been to China. One of my daughters has been to China 2 times. And I didn't particularly like it because the air in China is difficult to breathe, to say the least. And I'm not supposed to tell where my wife went, so I won't tell where my daughters went either. But for many years we couldn't get into China. President Nixon thought he saw an advantage to open up trade with China, open and talk to China, so he secretly sent Henry Kissinger into China. And then Nixon himself paid a visit to China in 1971. That helped open up to China, and it was hoping that we might get China on our side with the Soviet Union. And the visit to China did a little bit to end the Vietnam conflict, because when the Vietnamese realized they weren't going to get any more help from China, they at least talked to us. They sat down and talked. The two nations exchanged cultural ties, and your book states, tens of thousands of Chinese students either are studying or have studied in the United States. And most of the classes I've taught have had Chinese students in. Now, relations between China and the Soviet Union eventually improved somewhat. Relations between the United States and China are deteriorating fast. And part of it is a trade war in which it looks like the United States has lost its dispute with China in the trade war. Again, that's whether or not the United States won that one or lost. It's something that the future will determine. Now, it appeared to the Chinese the Soviets had a technological advantage over the West. Here's why. The Soviet Union put the first satellite into orbit. The Soviet Union put the first animal into space, the dog. The Soviet Union put the first humans into space. You might think the Soviet Union is better than our West. But I want to tell you how, well, for instance, how they got the dog into space. They put the dog in and said, we're not going to try to get the dog back. This actually happened. The dog died a week later in space. As for humans, they showed us photos of their cosmonaut team, and one day a certain individual disappeared from the team. We asked why they changed the story. I happened to him 3 times. In all 3 stories, he's deceased. One of them, he was dead in the barroom brawl and got crippled up pretty badly and then died of his wounds. In another story, he died in an automobile accident. In another story, his plane crash landed. But then they finally told us they sent 8 male and female cosmonauts into space and lost all 8 of them before they finally got one who survived. His name was Gagarin. They waited till Gagarin was down before they told us Gagarin had been up. And some Americans, how do we know Gagarin was up? Because we monitored. Now, how do we know the others were up? Because some ham radio operators, particularly Italian, would record the conversations these men had in Russian and then have an interpreter interpret what they said. And in one case, a female voice is heard, the world will never know about us. She knew she was dying. In another case, this ham recorded a heartbeat and took the heartbeat to a doctor, and the doctor said, this is the heartbeat of a dying, perishing man. They finally sent to name something, 8 cosmonauts who perished into space. Now, folk, I had someone at Lockheed try to convince me, give them credit, they got there first. Yeah, they cheated. In the long run, you'll beat a cheat if you stay honest. In the short run, you can't beat the cheat. I consider the way they went into the space program cheating. Their spacecraft were huge and large. Ours were tiny. We had them beat in miniaturization. Guess what? Their space program got so far and stopped. They have never to this day put a man on the moon. In the meantime, China is working feverishly to get their man on the moon, one of their men. And they might beat us back there. And we're working hard to get ourselves back there. But our space program eventually surpassed theirs. We had better technology. Eisenhower believed that. Eisenhower knew it. Their technology was screwed. Now, that does not apply to 2019. I mean, that applies to, the years that I was growing up, the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. But a lot of people believe that they have been able to hire better engineers and better scientists. And today, their space program might get off the ground better than ours. We go to their space station, folk, using their spacecraft. Hopefully all of you are aware of that. We don't have a spacecraft that can take us to the space station yet. We send unmanned ships, but we use, to get our men to the space station, or women too, we use their spacecraft. And every time we use them, we have to pay them like $20 million a person. Guess what? They can take that money and use it to hire better engineers. So what I said about them being behind, that was true 20 years ago, maybe even 15 years. I'm not sure if it's true now. All right. Now, folk, I've got to talk about the Vietnam War, and I'll tell you what, I had one of my department heads said, what do you do when you have a 30-minute topic and have 6 minutes left? I'm going to call it a day. Vietnam, I've already mentioned Vietnam a little bit. Vietnam was something that my generation went through. It was a terrible war, and it left 50,000 dead and many more crippled. And it divided our country. Divided us like we've never been divided. But that's a topic for later, for the next lecture. Everybody have a good weekend.
Can you do the same?
And I will see you.